If you recall to my previous review, I mentioned there was another game that got a similar treatment in terms of remaking a beloved IP. JAW, or Just Add Water, is a UK based studio who has worked on games such as Gravity Crash and Iron Bread, but they're also responsible for remastering the Oddworld games like Munch's Oddysee and Stranger's Wrath. But Oddworld New and Tasty, which was developed by the same company, is a remake of the 1997 game Abe's Oddysee, and is just as good, if not better, than its original counterpart. You play as Abe, a Madukan and slave to a processing plant named Rupture Farms. When Abe uncovers his superiors are planning to use him and his species for their next product, Abe abandons his job to escape the slaughterhouse. Even though the gameplay is identical to its 1997 counterpart, everything was built from scratch in order for the best experience. In the original, the levels were broken up by pre-rendered backgrounds, and every time Abe would move off screen, it would switch to a different backdrop. But in New and Tasty, the environments have been converted into 3D, and the camera follows Abe at all times. This approach allows you to absorb how beautiful these environments are, as the developers made sure they looked good while being used in such a way they don't feel repetitive. Due to his fragile figure, Abe can't face his enemies head on and must manipulate his surroundings to overcome them. Slicks will shoot Abe if he's detected, but are prone to possession, whether to access areas that Abe can't, turn their gun against their fellow comrades, and lead them into traps. Paramites will only attack if they're backed into a corner, and Scraps will attack on sight, unless it detects another, and both will fight to the death. Aside from avoiding enemies and solving puzzles, along his journey he must save his fellow Madukans. This is done with basic commands that are controlled with the directional pad, and since the game has two endings, depending on how many are saved, the game will decide in which one of those endings you'll witness. Some you'll find throughout your playthrough, but others are in hidden areas. It's also worth mentioning they all sound different to one another, so it's unlikely you'll hear the same tone of voice multiple times.
Everyone, hello. Thank you.
Oddworld New and Tasty introduces 3 difficulty levels depending on how skilled the player is. On normal difficulty, Abe can withstand a few hits, but that's not to say the game is too easy, as I've made multiple mistakes throughout my playthrough, but the option to have Abe die in one hit hasn't been lost on the hard setting. It also helps that aside from the forgiving checkpoints, players can save their progress by tapping the touchpad, while holding it will result in loading your last save, thus eliminating any lost progress. This feature may seem superfluous since our protagonist has infinite lives, but I can't stress enough how beneficial this was because the controls are cumbersome to say the least. In the original, Abe would walk by default while his run and jump animations were tied to specific buttons. This was important because there were hazards such as meat grinders, drops and explosives that could kill Abe in one hit. But in New and Tasty, his walk and run animations are controlled with the left analog stick, making accurate jumps feel like a dice roll. Luckily, sneaking is still controlled with a shoulder button, so it's rare that you'll wake up a Slig and get shot. In terms of length, the game can be completed within 7 hours, but if you're speedrunning, you could finish it in less than half the distance. Despite the frustration of Abe's movement being configured to the left analog stick, the pros outweigh this flaw because Just Add Water didn't just research the original game, they also made it with care and respect. With Oddworld Soulstorm in development and planned for a 2018 release, it'll be interesting how a remake of Abe's Exodus would turn out, even if it isn't being produced by the same company. Oddworld New and Tasty may look different, but this Oddysee is still worth going on.